Hey there everybody, Jose with Raiden Photos here, back at it again with another Photoshop tutorial. This is going to be an updated version of the frequency separation tutorial, seeing as I've changed a couple little things about the way I do it that let me push it a lot further and get a lot more out of it than I used to be able to. And that should help you guys out a lot, along with a couple little tips to refine it and make it so that your pictures look a lot sharper and cleaner at the end of it instead of getting that cloudy look that a lot of people tend to end up with because they tend to, push it a little too far and then they can't really get it back afterwards. So let's get right into it. I've already fixed the white balance and the lighting a little bit to make it a little easier to get detail in the skin and work on the photo itself, along with getting rid of a couple little stray hairs and things. So we'll just skip right past that and get right into it. Uh, So the first thing you want to do, we'll just start off as if you've never done frequency separation before, if you haven't seen the original video. You're going to make two copies of your background layer, and the easiest way to do that is Control J on your keyboard. Hit that twice, or if maybe on a Mac, I'm not sure what the commands are, but you can just click, drag it right down onto the new layer panel, and just do that twice, and you'll have two new layers. I think it's Command, so it's the same letter, Command J, and you'll get two copies on the Mac. I'm not positive, so I'll just avoid the whole keyboard shortcuts for the Mac. Sorry, guys. But, all right, so you have your two new layers right here. You're going to group those two together, so click one of them, hold the Shift key, and click the other one, and you'll select both of them, and then hit Control or Command G on your keyboard. I guess I'm going to do it anyway. Hopefully Command is the right thing. And this is just going to be Freak Sep, because I don't feel like typing the whole thing out. And, alright, so now you have your two layers. We're going to name this one the low layer, because it's on the low end. And the one on top is going to be the high layer. And what these two are is your tones and your textures. You can name them that way if you want, but usually we just go with high and low because it's easier and shorter to type. All right, and you can also add one more layer in between for correcting tones without ruining the actual tones layer itself. So we can name that one Tone Fix. Show you how to do that in a minute. So let's just get right into creating your layers. Deselect the two layers above the low layer so that they're not visible, because otherwise you won't be able to see exactly what you're doing to it. And normally, what we do here on the low layer is we would go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And this is where I changed my way of doing frequency separation. I'll show you why. Normally, the goal of Gaussian blur on the low layer is to get rid of as much texture in the skin as possible. So right about here, zoom in a little bit. Okay, so right about here, we've lost a good amount of texture in the skin, but you'll notice if we take it away real quick, watch the edge of lines like her chin or where the edge of her lip is, the edge of her nose, the edge of her eye line. Watch how that starts to fade into the rest of the skin or off of the face as we add Gaussian blur. So we're sitting here looking at the skin, and we're like, that's almost good, but we can still see some detail, so we need to go up a little bit higher. But look at the chin; it's starting to blend into the hair, and the hair is starting to blend into the face. So the higher we go, right about, oh, that's too high. It would be around like 11 or 12 where I'd be like perfectly happy with the amount of detail gone from the skin. But now her eye, like shadows in her eyes are blending into the light spots of her face. Her hair is starting to blend in. The edge of her chin starting to blend in. And what would happen is when I go to use the lasso tool later in order to blur certain lines and details in the face using frequency separation, what ends up happening is I end up blurring the actual edges of her face. So you'll see like actual like weird little uh, graphic problems in the photo that are really obvious. So you end up having to avoid parts of her face, trying not to do that. Or you end up pulling back on your frequency separation to try and avoid that. So you'd end up somewhere around here, like 6 probably. Or if you're really pushing it, you could do 7, but you still can't go anywhere near the edge of her chin. Now, I found a new little tool in the filter menu that'll actually let you push it a lot further than that without blurring the edges, and I'll show you what that is. So you go up to Filter. This is what we're going to use for the lower layer, so make sure your low layer is selected. You go to Filter, Noise, that's different, right? And Dust and Scratches is your new best friend. So Dust and Scratches, here we go. And the first thing you're going to notice right off the bat, I was up at 21 or 23 a second ago. The edges are still there. Dust and Scratches seems to have some kind of like edge detection, and it tries not to mix colors in between those edges. So what we were at earlier, 6 or 7. That's around where we were. Tons of detail still in the skin. Not really frequency separation, if you ask me. So we're gonna push it up even further. Let's see, 11. No, we still see some detail. Go right up to. Yeah, I'm thinking 15 should be good. You'll notice that's plenty of blur. That's like up in the that's up in the 9s and 10s of Gaussian blur without blurring the edges that are so important to us, because now we can work as far out to the edges of her face and eyes and things like that as we want without getting weird graphical artifacts. So that's perfect. Boom, let's go with 15. And remember that number. Whatever number you set in there is what you're going to use later. If you haven't already tried frequency separation before, that's a super important part. Whatever you set for dust and scratches is going to be what you set for the Gaussian blur that you're going to use right in a little bit. Let's make the texture layer next. So select your high layer. Make sure it's visible. It's the top layer, so you don't have to make anything else invisible. We're fine there. So select your high layer, go to Image up here on the menu bar, and then go to Apply Image. Whee! All right, so you're going to select in here in the Layer option, select your low layer, which you named for a reason. Click here on Invert, it's going to flip it, and then the layer blending mode that you want is going to be Add. Make sure the scale, if you've never used this before, it's probably set to 1, and it's going to look something like this. Make sure the scale is set to 2, and that gives us this this high-pass filter look without using an actual high-pass filter. High-pass filter can make this a little more complicated than it needs to be. The scale of 2 will actually adjust the photo according to the photo itself, rather than trying to set a high-pass filter that's different for every single photo. You can just set this to a scale of 2, and Photoshop will detect a certain amount of texture in the photo and leave it as what you see in this like high-pass filter look. It'll detect a certain amount of contrast in the photo. So here we go. Low layer selected, invert, and layer blending mode of add with a scale of 2. And we should be all set with that. Now, with your high layer still selected, make sure the blending mode of this is linear light. That way it gets rid of all the medium gray and leaves just the texture on top, combining the two into the photo below with no difference whatsoever when I make the layers invisible or visible. So that's our frequency separation done and done, and now we can get right to work on the photo. I'm not going to do too much with this because the whole point of this is just to show you guys the new trick, but here I'll just do a little bit of what we couldn't do before. See, right around here with the Gaussian blur, if I'd done it before, I'd be pulling in a little bit of her hair, which would leave like this weird milky brown color being pulled onto the face. Now, make sure your feathering on the lasso tool is set somewhere between 5 and 15, depending on how close to the face the actual photo is. I'm going to set this one to 10 because it's not really a headshot. It's like the upper body, so I don't need 15. But so yeah, the closer to the face you are, the higher that feathering can be. So right now, 10 is good. It says 10.8, but whatever. So let's say this little shadow is really, really sharp, and I want to soften it up so it's not as obvious or noticeable. Go right in here, go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we had, what was it, 15? Boom. Now that shadow's been softened, and it didn't pull any color from the hair. Make sure to notice that. Didn't pull any of the color out of the hair. So things like this. Now you just move on to the regular stuff. Bam. Bam. Any drastic changes in tone is what you're going for usually in frequency separation. Don't pay attention to blemishes and things like that. That's all in the texture layer. So going through with with the low layer and the lasso tool of frequency separation on things like this is really not going to make that much of a difference, and that's the mistake a lot of people make. They'll sit there blurring this same spot over and over, hoping to get rid of little dots and things, and eventually they'll get there, but they'll have no texture in the skin whatsoever. It'll be completely gone. So no need to do that. But changes like this, where it goes from light to dark, you want those transitions to be nice and smooth, and you want to blend them into each other. So you select it, and boom, done. Highlights to shadow, highlight to shadow. Let's see, right here. I want to smooth that out. Boom. I want this under the eye smooth. It doesn't get rid of the texture completely. It just smooths it out a little bit. And you should never blur the same spot more than twice. If you ever really need to do that, twice is enough. There are certain kinds of blemishes you can go for with this. It's those ones where it'll be like a little pimple or something with like a reddish kind of irritation around it. You can actually do a little circle around that, and it'll blend the red into the natural skin color and kind of fade it out a little bit, and then you can remove the texture itself in the high layer afterwards. So let's move on to the next thing. Here, smooth these out a little bit. Little changes in tone. Bam. All right, here's another little sharp shadow to blend in. The old school frequency separation, I would have pulled a big milky brown or dark black fade or like gradient onto her face from these dark shadows, and it would have been terrible. But now it's perfect. Can't even tell it was blurred at all, which is great. It just blurs the shadows, and that's it. And here's another one. The veins showing through, that greenish color, you can blend it into the actual color of the skin by pulling them into each other. Bam, frequency separation. You can do it twice, remember? Bam, bam. Oh, and if you haven't seen me going up here to the filter tab, it's because Photoshop saves the last filter you used with the exact amount you used and gives you a little shortcut key, Control F or Command F. So you can just continue with the lasso tool and then hit Control F to keep the Gaussian blur going at the same amount you had before. Remember, only twice. Don't push it more than that, or you'll lose more texture than you wanted, and you'll be in trouble. Alrighty, I think that's about it for the low layer. Now we can do a quick touch-up on the high layer, just because OCD says we have to. Let's grab the stamp tool, because that's what I'm comfortable with, and make sure the current layer is selected. The flow should be up to 100. Some people are a little more comfortable at 70%. They feel it looks more natural. Personally, I feel like I lose a little bit of texture around the edges, so if I brush a little more than I need to by accident, I might end up with this milky spot around the blemish that I removed, and I do not like that. Therefore, I do not do it. And after you select current layer, you see how it's highlighted in blue like that? Make sure you hit enter to get that deselected, otherwise you won't be able to draw on the photo at all, or move it, or zoom in, or do anything, because for some reason Photoshop just thinks that everything needs to be deselected before allowing you to do anything. So, bam, you just select nearby whatever the blemishes you want to remove. Make sure it's, not adding. Like, make sure you don't select this wrinkle and then throw it on top of that blemish that you're trying to remove. Because you're at 100%, so there's going to be no blur. You're literally just adding whatever you select onto whatever you draw. Select very close by to whatever blemish you're removing. Also, make sure that you're not moving from blurred areas outside the depth of field and drawing them onto detailed areas. Like further up the forehead over here is just outside of the depth of field. I think I shot this at 2.8. So if I selected up here and drew down here onto the more sharp and detailed part of the forehead, I'd actually be losing texture, which is terrible. So make sure you select very, very close to what you're actually drawing on. Don't select blurred areas and draw them onto detailed areas, and vice versa. If I draw detailed up onto this blur, it looks really, really unnatural, and you really don't want to do that. So make sure you stay very, very close to what you're fixing. Blur on blur. Usually you want your brush to move pretty much parallel to what you're coloring over. That way you don't accidentally do it, Alrighty. So this should be good here. Oh, OCD's getting to me. Alright. Forehead looks good. And if you're ever sick of, zooming in and out, constantly trying to, does it look good now? Okay, zoom in. Does it look good now? Okay, zoom in. Does it look good now? That'll drive you insane. So here's another quick little tip before I finish the video off. If you want to avoid zooming in and out and not use the navigator tool, which is kind of low resolution and crappy looking, you could even open the navigator tool on a separate window, and then you'd have the issue of, it would be a little bit low res, and if your monitor calibration is even a little bit off, it's going to drive you nuts, the difference between the two pictures. So here's a cool trick for single monitor that will help you out a lot, or even double monitor. You can move the windows around a different way. So go to Window, Arrange, and click New Window for whatever document you're working on. So now you have two of the exact same window. If you had a second monitor, you just click one of the windows and drag it off over onto your second monitor, or you can go up here if you have a single monitor, and did I say single twice? Okay, if you have a double monitor, you can drag it over. If you have a single, you can do this. Go to Arrange, Window, Arrange, to up vertical, since this is a kind of a vertical area of the photo that I'm working on. I like to use vertical. And now you have your windows lined up next to each other and the exact same size. The cool part about this is anything you do to these layers happens on both photos at the same time. So you can have one photo showing a different crop further away where you see full detail how the photo is going to be viewed from a distance, because nobody's going to, come up to your photo and just stick their face in it, nobody's gonna get this close to your photo and be like, I still see things. No, they're just gonna stand where they're supposed to stand and look at the photos from about this far away, maybe, or maybe a little bit closer. Right about there, I can see anything I need to work on her face. And then I click on this window, and I go ahead and zoom in to about where I need to be to work. Then I can spot anything that's really noticeable. Like my OCD would literally make me go through every little nook and cranny of someone's face. But if I'm looking over here instead, I can actually see like, oh, okay, I actually can see that from this far away. So it's worth going over it real quick, and then it goes away on both pictures at the same time, which is great. So now I could just work on the obvious things instead of things that I normally wouldn't notice. I can just look at both pictures, double check anything that sticks out. Obviously right here, this little one, this little one, and then this texture. This one right here you would have never noticed unless you zoomed out, because it was sort of a spread out texture that just wouldn't really tell you anything up close. So you're so zoomed in that you can't see it. Okay. Not drag this out too long. I'm trying to keep the video short. Alrighty. This one's going on Instagram later, so I kind of end up wanting to finish it. Okay. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. You can see a nice before and after transition there of how well frequency separation helps. And one last thing, if you lower the opacity of the low layer, you notice how it on the before and after flip, you get this sort of like cloudy effect to a lot of the places where any corrections were added. If you want to get a little sharper and a little more texture out of it, lower the opacity by about like 15 to 20% at the most. So like 85 or 80% tends to be really good. And you get a lot of sharpness and texture back without getting the blemishes back to, 100% visibility. So the photo ends up looking a lot more natural and a lot smoother that way, which is great. Low layer. Whoopsies. Anyway, the video's over. Letting the OCD carry me away there. And that's all you need to know. Low layer, the new low layer for frequency separation is filter, noise, dust, and scratches, just as a refresher there. It's a lot better, a lot more efficient. You can push it a lot further, and it won't ruin your photos if you get too close to an edge. So that's it for the updated frequency separation. Hope you guys liked the video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, or hit me up on Instagram at Raiden Photos, right up there. Instagram or Twitter. And yeah, hopefully you guys like the video. I'll follow up with the next part of the edit, hopefully by tomorrow. And yeah, have fun and enjoy.